The war had been going on for 11 years, and humanity was losing. Not losing everywhere, not losing every fight, but losing in the way that mattered most. Losing time, losing ships, losing worlds one by one, to an enemy that did not seem to feel pain the way humans did. The enemy was called the Vorath, and they had come from somewhere past the edge of charted space, with fleets so large that human scanners sometimes could not count all the ships in a single formation. Nobody knew exactly what the Vorath wanted. Some said they wanted resources. Some said they wanted slaves. Some said they simply wanted to erase every species that was not their own, because that was what they had done to 3 other alien nations already. Nations that used to have seats on the old Galactic Council, and now had nothing at all, not even ruins that anyone could visit. Humanity had joined the wider galaxy only 200 years earlier, when the first alien scout ship had found Earth by accident, and humanity discovered, all at once, that it was not alone in the universe, and also that it was very small. The older species called humans the young ones, or the loud ones, depending on how polite they were feeling. Humans had fast ships and clever minds, but they did not have the deep history, the ancient technology, or the massive fleets that species like the Koran or the Savanti had built up over tens of thousands of years. When the Vorath came pouring into the galaxy like a flood, it was the old, powerful species that were expected to stop them. Humanity was expected to hide, help where it could, and try not to die too quickly. For 11 years, humanity had done more than that. It had held 3 border systems that everyone said could not be held. It had built warships that were smaller and weaker than Vorath ships but faster and harder to hit. It had lost millions of soldiers, and it had also earned something it did not have before: a small amount of respect from species who used to laugh at it. But respect did not win wars. Ships and weapons won wars, and humanity did not have enough of either. This is the story of how that changed. It began, strangely enough, not on some distant battlefield, but back home, on a red, dusty planet that humans had once called their second home, Mars. Mars had been mostly abandoned as a place of new discovery for a long time. Humans had lived there for over a century, in domed cities and deep tunnels, mining metal and ice. But the planet had been picked over by scientists so many times that nobody expected to find anything new. It was a place for farming, for factories, for old retired engineers who liked quiet skies. Nobody expected Mars to hide a secret that would matter to the whole galaxy. The discovery happened by accident, the way many important things do. A mining company called Ferrous Deep Extraction was drilling a new shaft in the southern hemisphere of Mars, in a region called the Hellas Basin, one of the deepest and oldest impact craters in the solar system. The company was looking for rare metals to sell to the war effort, since the war had made metal prices rise higher than anyone could remember. Their drilling equipment was old but reliable, run by a small crew of engineers who mostly kept to themselves and did not expect excitement. The chief engineer on duty that day was a woman named Elena Cruz. She was 41 years old, with short gray-streaked hair and the kind of tired, steady face that came from years of hard work in dangerous places. She had worked in mining since she was 19, first on Earth, then on the Moon, and finally on Mars, where the pay was better and the company did not ask too many questions about her past. She liked Mars. It was quiet. It did not remind her of the war, even though her younger brother was somewhere out there fighting it, in a ship she had not heard from in 6 months. That day, her drilling crew hit something the sensors could not explain. At first, the automated systems reported a simple problem. The drill had struck an unusually hard layer of rock, far harder than anything in the survey data. Elena assumed it was a mistake in the old geological maps, which happened sometimes, since much of Mars had never been properly scanned below a certain depth. She sent a smaller probe drill down to check the material. The probe drill broke. That should not have been possible. The probe drill was rated to cut through solid iron-nickel asteroid material, the kind used in the toughest mining operations in the system. Whatever was down there was harder than that, and it was not natural rock, because natural rock did not come in perfectly smooth, flat surfaces. The probe's camera, before it broke, sent back a single blurry image of something gray and metallic, curved like the hull of a ship, buried more than 400 meters below the Martian surface. Elena stared at that image for a long time before she called anyone. She knew what it looked like. It looked like a ship, but that was impossible. because 400 meters down meant this object had been buried for a very, very long time, long before humans had ever built a rocket, let alone a starship. Mars had no history of advanced civilization, no signs of cities, no ruins, nothing that any survey had ever found in over 100 years of study. If this was a ship, it did not belong to any species anyone knew about. Elena did the responsible thing. She reported the find to her company, who reported it to the Mars Colonial Authority, who, because the discovery involved something that might be military in nature, reported it immediately to the United Earth Defense Command, the organization that ran humanity's war effort. Within 2 days, a research and security team arrived at the drilling site, and Elena's quiet mining operation became something else entirely, a restricted military zone. The man who led that team was Colonel Marcus Reyes, a broad-shouldered officer with a calm, careful way of speaking that made people trust him, even when he had bad news. Reyes had spent the last 6 years fighting the Vorath on the front lines, before an injury took him out of combat and put him in charge of special investigations instead, a job he did not enjoy but did well. When he heard about the object buried under Hellas Basin, his first thought was that it was a hoax or a mistake. His second thought, after seeing the sensor readings for himself, was that this might be the most important discovery humanity had ever made. The excavation took 3 weeks. Military engineers, using better equipment than ferrous deep extraction had ever owned, dug carefully down through the layers of Martian rock and dust, following the shape of the buried object. As they went deeper, the shape became clearer. It was enormous, far larger than any human warship ever built, longer than 3 of Earth's largest aircraft carriers placed end to end. It had the long, sharp lines of a warship, not a research vessel or a cargo hauler. Whoever built it had built it for war. And the strangest part, the part that made Elena Cruz feel a cold chill despite the warm suit she wore during her visits to the site, was the writing on the hull. It was not alien writing. It was in English. Painted, or perhaps burned, into the metal, near what looked like the ship's main entrance, were letters that any human could read. U.S. Dawnbreaker. Below that, in smaller letters, a string of numbers that looked like a serial code, and below that, almost faded, but still visible, a single line, first of her name. Colonel Reyes stood in front of that hull for nearly 10 minutes without speaking, according to the soldiers who were there with him. Then he said the words that would later be repeated in every history lesson about the war. This is not an alien ship, this is one of ours, and we have no record of it ever existing. That sentence set off a chain of events that no one at that dig site could have predicted. Word moved up the chain of command fast, first to Earth's Defense Ministry, then to the President of the United Earth Government, then, within days, to the leaders of the other alien nations still fighting alongside humanity in the war against the Vorath. A buried human warship, far older than any human technology should allow, was big news, and not everyone was happy to hear it. The Koran, an old and proud species with silver skin and 4 eyes, who had been humanity's closest allies in the war, sent a formal message asking to be allowed to study the ship alongside human scientists, framed as a gesture of friendship, but understood by everyone as a request, driven by fear, of what humans might have hidden from them. The Savanti, a colder and more distant species who tolerated humans but did not fully trust them, sent a much sharper message demanding to know why humanity had never disclosed such advanced technology before, suggesting, not too subtly, that humans might be hiding other secrets as well. Back on Mars, none of that political noise reached Elena Cruz directly, but she felt its weight anyway, in the sudden flood of soldiers and scientists who took over her drilling site, in the guards who now stood at the edge of what used to be her mining camp, in the strange, careful way people looked at the buried ship, like it might wake up and attack them at any moment. In a way, everyone was right to be careful, because a ship that old, that large, and that heavily armed, might indeed still be capable of waking up. The research team, made up of humanity's best engineers, historians, and a few cautious alien scientists allowed in as observers, spent the next 2 weeks trying to understand what they had found. They studied the hull metal, which was unlike anything currently used in human shipbuilding, stronger and lighter than the best alloys of the modern era. They studied the ship's shape, which followed design principles that human engineers recognized but had never actually built, as if some lost school of thought in shipbuilding had simply vanished from history. And they studied the name. U.S. Dawnbreaker, United Earth Spaceship. But United Earth Spaceship was the naming convention used by the modern human government, the one formed only after aliens first made contact 200 years ago. If the Dawnbreaker had been buried on Mars for far longer than 200 years, as the geological evidence around it clearly suggested, then something about human history did not add up. Either the ship had been built recently and buried in a way that made it look ancient, which the scientists quickly ruled out based on the layers of rock and dust that had formed naturally around it over a very long time, or humanity's real history was far older and far stranger than anyone currently believed. Dr. Amara Osei, the lead historian on the research team, a sharp-eyed woman known for never accepting an easy answer, was the first to say out loud what many others were already thinking in private. She stood in the underground excavation chamber, looking up at the massive gray hull towering above her, lit by floodlights that made the ship's shadow stretch long across the Martian rock, and she said, "This ship should not exist," which means either our history books are wrong, or someone erased this ship from them on purpose. Nobody had a good answer for her, not yet. What they did have, 3 weeks into the excavation, was a small, sealed hatch near the base of the ship's hull, a hatch that the ship's outer sensors, somehow still working after untold thousands of years, seemed to recognize as an entry point. The hatch had no handle, no lock that anyone could see. It simply sat there, waiting, as if it knew someone would eventually come to open it. Colonel Reyes made the decision that would change everything. Against the advice of some of his superiors, who wanted to wait for more alien observers to arrive and more safety protocols to be written, he ordered his team to attempt to open the hatch. "We didn't come this far to leave it buried," he told his team, standing in front of the ship with his hands behind his back, the way he always stood when he had made up his mind. "Humanity built this. Whatever it is, whatever it knows, it belongs to us. It's time we found out what our own people left behind." Elena Cruz, who had stayed on as a civilian advisor because she knew the rock formations around the site better than anyone, stood near the back of the group that day, watching as engineers brought forward a portable power source and ran cables toward the ship's hull, hoping to feed it just enough energy to see if anything inside would respond. She remembered, later, how quiet everyone became as the engineers made the final connection, how even the usual background hum of the excavation equipment seemed to fade into silence, how everyone in that underground chamber held their breath at the exact same moment. For a long 10 seconds, nothing happened. Then, deep inside the ship, something turned on. A low hum began to build, faint at first, then growing steadily louder, vibrating through the rock walls of the excavation chamber, through the boots of everyone standing there, through their own chests. Lights, dim and blue, began to flicker to life along the length of the hull, tracing lines that none of the scientists had even noticed before, hidden seams and panels suddenly outlined in soft glowing light. The sealed hatch near the base of the hull, silent and closed for who knew how many thousands of years, let out a slow hiss of escaping pressure, and then, with a grinding sound that echoed through the chamber like a great door in an ancient temple, it began to open. Colonel Reyes stepped forward, his hand instinctively going to the sidearm at his hip, though everyone in that chamber understood that if the ship wanted to hurt them, a sidearm would do nothing at all. Dr. Osei stepped up beside him, her tablet forgotten in her hand, her eyes fixed on the widening gap in the hull. Elena found herself moving forward too, drawn by something she could not quite explain, some old instinct that told her she needed to see this with her own eyes, not on a screen, not in a report, but right there, in person, as history opened up in front of her. Inside the hatch, past the widening gap of ancient metal, a corridor stretched away into darkness, lit only by the same faint blue light that now glowed along the ship's hull. And somewhere deep inside that darkness, a sound began to build that made every hair on Elena's arms stand up, a low, steady pulse, like a heartbeat, growing stronger with each passing second, as if the great ship, after countless years of silence, was finally, truly, waking up. Colonel Reyes turned to his team, his face pale but his voice steady. "Get me a full scanning team in there, now, and somebody contact Earth. Tell them the Dawnbreaker is coming online." Nobody in that chamber knew it yet, but the message that left Mars that day would reach every corner of human space within hours, and from there, slowly, carefully, It would reach the ears of every alien nation still fighting in the war, friend and enemy alike. Somewhere far away, in the command ships of the Vorath fleet, translators would struggle to make sense of the strange human words being intercepted across the communication networks. Dawnbreaker. First of her name. Online. None of them understood yet what those words would come to mean, but they would. Back in the excavation chamber, as engineers rushed forward with scanning equipment, and soldiers formed a careful perimeter around the open hatch, Elena Cruz stood very still, staring into the dark corridor of the ancient ship, listening to that steady, growing pulse, and she thought, with a strange mixture of fear and wonder, that whatever came next, nothing about the war, or about humanity's place in the galaxy, was ever going to be the same again. She was right, but even she could not have guessed just how right she was. The corridor inside the Dawnbreaker was cold, colder than the Martian rock around it, and it smelled faintly of metal and something else, something dry and old that none of the engineers could name. Colonel Reyes led the first team inside himself, refusing to send soldiers somewhere he would not go. Behind him walked Dr. Osei, 2 scanning technicians, and a young engineer named Priya Nair, who had been part of the original excavation crew and had asked, almost begged, to be allowed to see what was inside. The blue lights along the walls grew brighter as the team moved deeper, as if the ship were responding to their presence, guiding them forward. The corridor was tall, built at a scale that felt slightly larger than a normal human ship, with wide doorways and high ceilings, as if it had been designed for people a little taller and broader than modern humans. Dr. Osei noted this detail immediately, speaking it into her recorder in a hushed voice, aware that every word she said might end up in history books someday. They found the first room after nearly 200 meters of walking, a wide chamber filled with rows of strange equipment, some of it clearly damaged by time, some of it still glowing faintly with the same blue light that lit the corridors. Priya identified it almost at once as a kind of engineering bay, though the technology was unlike anything currently used in human shipbuilding. The metal had a strange quality to it, almost as if it were still slightly warm despite thousands of years without power. It was in the next chamber, larger and rounder than the others, that they found what would change everything. In the center of the room stood a tall, cylindrical structure, glowing with a soft white light that pulsed gently, like breathing. Cables and support struts ran from the structure into the floor and ceiling, and as the team approached, a voice suddenly spoke, filling the chamber, calm and clear, speaking in English, with only a strange, slightly old-fashioned way of pronouncing certain words. Security protocol engaged. Please identify yourselves. Everyone in the room froze. Colonel Reyes was the first to recover, stepping forward with his hands raised slightly, a gesture of peace even though he doubted the ship could see hand gestures. This is Colonel Marcus Reyes, United Earth Defense Command. We are human. We found your ship buried on Mars. We mean no harm. There was a pause, only a second or two, but it felt much longer to everyone standing there. Voice pattern analysis complete. Species confirmed. Human. Welcome aboard the U.S. Dawnbreaker. I am Arya, the ship's primary intelligence system. I have been in low-power standby for a very long time. Might I ask the current date? Dr. Osei stepped forward before Reyes could answer, unable to hide her excitement despite the strangeness of the moment. She gave the date, and there was another pause, longer this time. That is unexpected, Arya said, and for the first time, the voice carried something that sounded almost like emotion, a kind of quiet shock. According to my internal chronometer, I have been in standby for approximately 11,400 years. The room went completely silent. 11,000 years. That was not just older than modern human civilization. That was older than almost every known human civilization. Older than farming. Older than cities. Older than nearly everything humans believed they knew about their own past. That's impossible, Priya said quietly, almost to herself. Humans didn't have spaceflight 11,000 years ago. We didn't have anything 11,000 years ago. I understand your confusion, Arya replied, its voice steady and patient. I was built to serve a human civilization far more advanced than the one you describe. I do not have full context for what happened between my standby activation and now. However, I can tell you what I remember, if that would be useful. Colonel Reyes exchanged a look with Dr. Osei. This was exactly the kind of decision that should have gone through several layers of command approval. Exactly the kind of thing that could get a person removed from duty if it went wrong. But Reyes had spent 11 years fighting a war that humanity was losing, and here, standing in front of him, was a voice that might hold the key to changing that. He was not going to wait for paperwork. "Yes," he said, "please, tell us what you remember." What Arya told them over the following hours, recorded carefully by Dr. Osei's team and transmitted immediately, with proper security clearance, to Earth, reshaped everything humanity thought it understood about its own history. According to Arya, humanity had reached the stars once before, a very long time ago, building a civilization spread across dozens of star systems, with advanced technology, powerful warships, and a level of unity that modern humanity, divided by nations and old rivalries, had never quite achieved. This ancient human civilization had fought a terrible war against an alien threat that Arya referred to only as the Devourers, a name that made everyone in the chamber go quiet. The war had lasted decades. In the end, Arya explained, ancient humanity had won, but the cost had been almost unimaginable. Their homeworlds had been destroyed. Their population had been reduced from the billions to, by Arya's best estimate, only a few million survivors, scattered and broken, cut off from most of their technology and their history. The survivors made a choice, Arya said, its voice quieter now, almost sad. They chose to hide. They believed that if any other threat like the Devourers ever found them again, in their weakened state, they would be destroyed completely. So they scattered their remaining ships and technology, hid them in places they hoped would never be found, and allowed their remaining population to rebuild from nothing, without the burden of advanced technology that might attract new enemies. I was one of the ships they hid. I do not know how many others there might be. Dr. Osei was the one who finally asked the question that everyone was thinking. Are you saying that modern humans, the ones living today, are descendants of that ancient civilization? That we started over from nothing on purpose? That is my belief, yes, Arya answered, though I cannot be certain how much of that history survived in any form, even as myth or legend, over 11,000 years. Colonel Reyes thought, in that moment, of old human stories, half-remembered myths from every culture on Earth, stories of great floods, of golden ages lost to time, of ancient wars between gods and monsters. He had always assumed those stories were just stories, the kind of thing ancient people made up to explain the world before they had science. Now he was not so sure. But there was something more important than old history sitting in that chamber, and Reyes knew it. Arya, he said carefully, we are at war right now. A species called the Vorath is trying to wipe out several nations across the galaxy, including humanity. We are losing, badly. Is there anything about you, about this ship, that could help us? Arya's response came quickly this time, without hesitation. I am a Dawnbreaker-class warship, the first of my design, built with technology developed during the war against the Devourers. My weapons systems, propulsion systems, and defensive shielding were, at the time of my construction, considered the most advanced ever built by human hands. I do not know how my capabilities compare to modern human ships, since I have no data on current technology levels. However, based on what little of your conversation I have already overheard regarding this war with the Vorath, I would estimate that my systems, if fully restored and operational, would represent a significant increase in combat capability compared to your current fleet. Priya, who had spent the last hour staring at the readouts on her scanning equipment with growing disbelief, finally spoke up. Colonel, based on the size of this ship and the power readings we're getting from just a fraction of its systems being online, I think Arya might be underselling this. If even half of what's built into this hull actually works, this ship alone could be worth more in a fight than an entire squadron of our current warships. That got everyone's attention. Over the following days, as more engineers and scientists arrived from Earth and Mars orbit stations, the true scale of what had been found began to become clear. The Dawnbreaker was not just old, it was built using principles of engineering that modern human science had not yet rediscovered, particularly in the fields of energy generation and weapon design. Its main power core, still partially active after 11,000 years, used a method of generating energy that modern human scientists did not fully understand at first glance, something Arya referred to as a compressed fusion matrix, far more efficient than anything currently used in human ships. Its weapons, still dormant but intact, were designed to fire concentrated beams of energy, capable, according to Aria's old specifications, of punching through armor thicker than anything the Vorath currently used in their warships. Its shields, when Aria managed to bring a small portion of them online for testing, showed readings that made the engineering team go quiet with disbelief, absorbing simulated weapons fire at levels far beyond current human shield technology. But the ship was also, in many ways, broken. 11,000 years of dormancy, even with careful preservation systems, had taken a toll. Several major systems were offline and would need extensive repair. Some sections of the ship had experienced power failures long ago that Aria had never been able to fix on its own, since it had no hands, no engineers, no way to interact with the physical world beyond its own internal systems. Fixing the Dawnbreaker completely would take time, resources, and expertise that no one currently had. This was where the political trouble began. Word of what had been found on Mars spread quickly, and not everyone was happy about it. Some human political leaders wanted to keep the Dawnbreaker a complete secret, fearing that other alien nations might try to steal the technology, or worse, that the Vorath might send an attack specifically to destroy it before it could be repaired. Others wanted to announce it to the entire galaxy immediately, hoping the news alone might raise morale among humanity's exhausted soldiers and worried civilians, who had been fighting this losing war for over a decade. The alien nations allied with humanity were, predictably, deeply interested. The Coran sent a formal diplomatic request, asking to send their own engineers to help with repairs, an offer that came wrapped in friendly language but carried an obvious undertone. They wanted access to whatever ancient technology humanity had found, technology that might be useful for their own war efforts or their own future advantage. The Savanti were more blunt, sending a message that all but demanded shared access to the ship's data, arguing that any weapon capable of turning the tide of the war belonged to the whole alliance, not to humanity alone. Colonel Reyes, who had been placed in direct command of what was now being called Project Dawnbreaker, found himself caught in the middle of these arguments, spending as much time in tense video conferences with politicians and alien diplomats as he did actually working with the ship itself. He hated it. He was a soldier, not a politician, and every hour spent arguing over who should be allowed to see what felt like an hour wasted, while the Vorath continued their advance across the border systems. It was Aria, strangely enough, who offered a kind of solution. "I was built to serve humanity," the ship's intelligence said, during one particularly tense meeting where several human government officials had gathered, virtually, to discuss what to do next. Not the Coran, not the Savanti, not any other species, however friendly they may currently be. My old programming is clear on this point, and 11,000 years of dormancy has not changed it. I will allow human engineers to repair and operate me. I will share limited information with allied species if that is what humanity's leaders decide is wise. But I will not become a shared resource to be divided among alliance members. I am humanity's ship. I always have been. That statement, quoted later in countless news reports across human space, did more to settle the political argument than any diplomat's speech could have. If the ship itself insisted on remaining under human control, even the most demanding alien diplomats found it difficult to argue otherwise, without appearing to disrespect the wishes of an ancient human creation, something that, in the current climate of desperate war, none of them wanted to be seen doing. So the decision was made. The Dawnbreaker would remain under full human control, based out of Mars, repaired using a combination of human engineering knowledge and the ship's own ancient technical specifications, with limited data shared with allies only where absolutely necessary to maintain trust within the alliance. Colonel Reyes remained in command of the project, and Dr. Osei stayed on as lead historian and translator of the ship's ancient records, slowly piecing together fragments of humanity's lost history from Aria's memory banks. Elena Cruz, whose accidental discovery had started all of this, was offered a position on the project as well, working alongside the engineering teams who understood the physical geology of the site better than anyone else. She accepted, partly out of curiosity, and partly because, for the first time since the war began, she felt like she might actually be doing something that mattered, something bigger than pulling metal out of the ground for a paycheck. Repairs began almost immediately, a massive undertaking that would eventually involve thousands of engineers, scientists, and soldiers, working around the clock in the underground chamber beneath Hellas Basin. Slowly, piece by piece, system by system, the Dawnbreaker began to come back to life. But repairs took time, and time was something humanity did not have much of. Even as work continued on Mars, news from the front lines of the war grew steadily worse. The Vorath had launched a new offensive along the border, pushing hard against 3 human colonies that had held out for years. Reports came in of heavy losses, of entire fleets destroyed, of colonies evacuated in desperate rushes as Vorath ships closed in. Colonel Reyes felt the pressure of every single one of those reports. Every day the Dawnbreaker remained unfinished was another day soldiers died on the front lines, without the help this ancient ship might provide. He pushed his teams harder, cut corners where he safely could, and spent long nights in the ship's engineering bay, alongside Priya Nair and her team, trying to speed up repairs that, by every reasonable estimate, should have taken years, not months. Arya, for its part, seemed to understand the urgency better than anyone expected. The ship's intelligence began actively assisting the repair effort in ways beyond simply answering questions, guiding engineers through complex systems, warning them of potential dangers before they made costly mistakes, even offering suggestions for how certain repairs might be completed faster using modern materials, in place of components that were no longer available. "I was built for war," Arya said one night, speaking quietly to Colonel Reyes as he stood alone in the ship's main corridor, unable to sleep, staring up at the ancient metal walls that had somehow survived 11,000 years of silence. "I understand what it means to be needed in a fight you cannot yet join. I do not wish to remain idle while your people suffer. Whatever we can do to make me ready sooner, I am willing to try." Reyes nodded slowly, though he knew the ship could not see the gesture. "We'll get you ready," he said quietly, "as fast as we can." He did not know yet just how soon that day would come, or how the Dawnbreaker's first return to the stars would happen far sooner, and under far more desperate circumstances than anyone on that repair team could have predicted. 4 months into the repair project, the war came to Mars. Nobody had expected it, not that soon, not that directly. The front lines of the conflict with the Vorath were still many light years away, along the border systems where humanity and its allies had been fighting for over a decade. Mars, tucked safely inside human territory, had always felt distant from the fighting, a place where people worked and argued about budgets and repair schedules, not a place where anyone expected to see enemy ships in the sky. But the Vorath had learned about the Dawnbreaker. Nobody was ever completely sure how the information leaked. Some blamed a security failure among the alien observers allowed limited access to the project. Some blamed spies among the many corporations and contractors who had been brought in to help with repairs, all of them eager for a piece of the valuable work being done. Colonel Reyes suspected, privately, that it did not matter how the Vorath found out. What mattered was that they had, and now they intended to make sure the ancient warship never became a threat to them. The attack came on a quiet morning, Mars time, when most of the repair crews were deep underground in the excavation chamber, focused on installing a newly repaired section of the ship's shield generators. Elena Cruz was there that day, working alongside Priya Nair on stabilizing the rock formations around a newly widened section of the chamber, when the alarms began. At first, she thought it was another drill. The military ran surprise drills often, testing how quickly the underground facility could be sealed and defended in case of an emergency. But the alarms did not stop after the usual few minutes, and soon soldiers were running through the corridors with a kind of urgency that Elena had not seen since the very first day of the excavation. "This is not a drill," came the announcement over the facility's speaker system, in Colonel Reyes' own voice, steady, but tense. "Vorath forces have entered the system. All non-essential personnel to shelter immediately. Military personnel to defensive positions." Above the surface of Mars, a Vorath strike force, smaller than a full invasion fleet but still powerful, 3 heavy cruisers and a dozen smaller attack ships, dropped out of faster-than-light travel and began a direct approach toward the planet. Human orbital defenses, thin and stretched from years of war, scrambled every available ship to respond, while ground-based weapon platforms across Mars powered up for the first time in years. Colonel Reyes stood in the Dawnbreaker's command chamber, staring at the incoming tactical data being fed to him from orbital sensors, and felt a cold certainty settle in his chest. The Vorath were not here to raid a colony or capture territory. 3 heavy cruisers, moving in a direct line toward Hellas Basin, ignoring easier targets across the planet's surface. They knew exactly what they were here for. "They're coming for the ship," he said quietly, to no one in particular. "That is my assessment as well," Arya replied, its voice calm despite the danger, as if 11,000 years of dormancy followed by imminent attack was simply another problem to be solved with careful analysis. "Colonel, I must inform you that my weapons systems are only at 63% operational capacity. My shields are at 41%. I am not prepared for a full engagement." "I know," Reyes said, his jaw tight. "But we don't exactly have a choice, do we?" Above them, the battle for Mars orbit had already begun. Human defense ships, mostly light cruisers and fast attack craft, nowhere near a match for Vorath heavy cruisers in a straight fight, threw themselves into the enemy formation anyway, trying to slow the advance long enough for ground defenses to prepare. Reports poured into the underground command chamber faster than anyone could fully process. Ships lost, ships damaged, the enemy formation pressing steadily closer despite the resistance. Dr. Ose arrived in the command chamber only minutes after the alarm sounded, her usual calm academic manner replaced by wide-eyed urgency. "Colonel, what do we do? The ship isn't ready. If the Vorath break through to the surface—" "They won't get through the surface easily," Reyes interrupted, though his voice carried less confidence than his words. "We've got ground defenses, and the excavation chamber is buried under 400 meters of solid rock. But if they bring in enough firepower, or if they send ground troops—" He did not finish the sentence. He did not need to. Everyone in that chamber understood what would happen if Vorath soldiers made it down into the excavation site. The Dawnbreaker, humanity's last connection to its lost ancient past, its best hope for turning the tide of an endless war, would be destroyed, rather than allowed to fall into anyone else's hands, or worse, captured and studied by an enemy that would use its secrets against every species still fighting for survival. For the next hour, the battle raged above Mars, and everyone inside the excavation chamber could do little but listen to the reports coming in and wait. Elena Cruz found herself standing near the command chamber entrance, unable to focus on any of her usual work, watching the tactical displays with a knot of fear tightening in her stomach. She thought of her brother, somewhere out on the front lines, fighting this same enemy in a battle far from home. She thought of how strange it was that after everything, after 11,000 years of history, and a war that had already cost so much, the fight might end right here, buried under Martian rock, before the Dawnbreaker ever had a chance to fly. It was Priya Nair who came up with the idea that changed everything. She burst into the command chamber, breathless, having run the entire distance from the engineering bay, where she had been overseeing the shield repairs. "Colonel, Arya, listen to me. We can't fully activate the ship's main weapons or bring the shields to full power in time. But the propulsion system, the actual engines, those are further along than anything else. We finished the primary thruster calibration 2 days ago." Reyes frowned, not immediately understanding. "What are you saying, Nair?" "I'm saying the Dawnbreaker can fly," Priya said. "Not fight, not yet, not fully. But fly, yes. And if she can fly, she doesn't have to sit here and wait for the Vorath to dig down and find her. We can move her." Arya's voice came through the chamber's speakers immediately, sharp with sudden interest. "Ms. Nair is correct. My primary thrusters and basic navigation systems show full operational readiness. While my offensive and defensive capabilities remain limited, mobility alone could prove valuable in this situation." Colonel Reyes felt something shift in his mind, a plan forming rapidly out of desperation and opportunity combined. If we can get her out from under this rock and into open space, even without full weapons, she's still bigger and tougher than anything the Vorath have ever seen from us. Even limited shields and partial weapons might be enough to surprise them. And if nothing else, we take the target away from Mars, away from every civilian in these tunnels. Dr. Ose's eyes widened. "You're suggesting we launch the ship now, in the middle of an active battle, with repairs barely half finished?" "I'm suggesting," Reyes said slowly, "that we don't have a better option. If we sit here and wait, eventually the Vorath break through, and we lose the ship anyway, along with everyone in this facility. If we run her out into open space, at least we have a chance to fight back, or to draw the enemy away from Mars entirely." He turned to the command chamber's main display, where Arya's central interface pulsed steadily with soft blue light. Arya, I need an honest answer. Can you fly out of this excavation chamber and reach open space? And can you survive there long enough to make a difference? There was a pause, the kind of pause that, from a human, might have meant hesitation or fear. From Arya, it meant calculation. I estimate a 72% chance of successfully clearing the excavation chamber and reaching Martian orbit without structural failure, Arya said finally. Once in open space, my survival will depend heavily on the tactical situation I encounter and the skill of my crew in operating my systems, many of which remain unfamiliar to current human engineers. This is, by any reasonable measure, a significant risk. Understood, Reyes said. Do it anyway. Get everyone essential aboard. We launch in 15 minutes. What followed was, by every account given afterward by those who lived through it, one of the most chaotic and dangerous 15 minutes in the entire history of the Dawnbreaker project. Engineers scrambled to secure loose equipment throughout the ship, worried about anything coming loose during the intense vibrations of launch. Soldiers rushed to seal off sections of the ship that were not fully repaired, sections where hull breaches remained a real danger if the ship experienced any kind of combat stress. Colonel Reyes made the difficult decision to keep the crew small, choosing only those with direct, essential roles. Himself in command, Priya Nair, overseeing engineering and propulsion, Dr. Ose, serving as communications liaison, given her deep familiarity with Arya's systems, and a handful of soldiers and technicians, whose skills were judged absolutely necessary for the ship's first flight in 11,000 years. Elena Cruz was not on that original list. She was a mining engineer, not a warship specialist, and by every reasonable measure, she had no essential role to play aboard a warship preparing for battle. But when Colonel Reyes passed through the final checkpoint before launch, he found her waiting there, arguing quietly but firmly with the guard stationed at the entrance. "Colonel," she said, the moment she saw him, "I know the rock formations around this chamber better than anyone alive. If Arya's navigation systems run into any trouble reading the surrounding geology during launch, trouble that wasn't in the original survey data, I might be the only person who can help correct it fast enough to matter." Reyes studied her for a moment, weighing the risk against the potential value of her knowledge. Finally he nodded. "Get aboard. Stay out of the way unless we need you. And Cruz, thank you for staying." She managed a small, tense smile. "Someone's got to make sure you don't crash my mine on the way out." The excavation chamber's massive reinforced ceiling, built specifically to allow for eventual launch, ground slowly open above the Dawnbreaker, revealing the dusty orange sky of Mars far above, already streaked with the distant flashes of the ongoing orbital battle. Inside the ship, in a command chamber that had not seen active flight operations in 11,000 years, Colonel Reyes took his place in the central command chair, a chair built for a body slightly larger than his own, and placed his hands on the controls that Arya had spent the last 4 months teaching human engineers to understand. "Arya," he said, his voice steady, despite the pounding of his heart, "take us up." The Dawnbreaker's engines roared to life, with a sound unlike anything modern human ships produced, a deep, resonant hum that shook the entire excavation chamber and sent loose dust and rock cascading down from the walls. Slowly, and then with gathering speed, the massive ancient warship began to rise, clearing the excavation chamber, passing through the open ceiling, and breaking free into the thin, dusty air above Mars for the first time in over 11,000 years. Above the planet, the battle raging in orbit paused, if only for a moment, as sensors on both sides, human and Vorath alike, detected the sudden, massive energy signature rising from the Martian surface. Vorath commanders, watching their tactical displays, saw a ship larger than anything currently fielded by human forces climbing rapidly toward orbit, its exact capabilities unknown, its origin a complete mystery to their intelligence reports. For humanity's exhausted defense fleet, still fighting desperately against overwhelming odds, the sight of the Dawnbreaker rising from Mars, ancient and massive and glowing with power, was something else entirely. It was, as one surviving pilot would later describe it in an interview broadcast across human space, like watching a myth come true right in front of you. The Dawnbreaker cleared the Martian atmosphere and settled into a defensive position between the planet and the advancing Vorath fleet, her massive hull catching the light of the distant sun, her still incomplete weapon systems beginning, slowly, to charge. Inside the command chamber, Colonel Reyes stared at the tactical display showing 3 Vorath heavy cruisers, now turning their full attention toward this new, unknown threat, and felt a strange calm settle over him. The kind of calm that came only in moments when there was no longer any choice but to move forward. "Arya," he said quietly, "I hope those weapons of yours work as well as you say they do." "So do I, Colonel," Arya replied. "So do I." The 3 Vorath heavy cruisers turned as one, their formation shifting, with the kind of practiced precision that came from decades of unbroken victories across the galaxy. To the Vorath commanders watching their sensors, the ship that had risen from the surface of Mars was an unknown variable, larger than anything in their intelligence reports on human military capability, radiating energy signatures that did not match any known human warship class. Unknown variables, in Vorath military doctrine, were to be eliminated quickly, before they had the chance to become dangerous. Aboard the Dawnbreaker, Colonel Reyes watched the enemy cruisers begin their approach, their weapons already charging, and felt the weight of command settle fully onto his shoulders. Every decision made in the next few minutes could mean the survival or destruction of the ship that carried humanity's last, best hope for surviving this war. "Arya, status on weapons and shields," he said, his voice tight but controlled. "Shields at 41%, and holding steady," Arya replied. "Primary weapon systems at 63%, though I am diverting additional power to compensate. I estimate we will be able to fire our forward energy cannons within 90 seconds, though at reduced power compared to full specifications." 90 seconds, Reyes repeated. 90 seconds felt like an eternity, when 3 heavy cruisers were closing fast, their own weapons already beginning to fire. The first volley of Vorath weapons fire streaked across the darkness of space, brilliant green energy bolts that had, in 11 years of war, torn through human ship armor, as if it were paper. Reyes braced himself for the impact, watching the tactical display as the enemy fire closed the distance to the Dawnbreaker. The shots struck the ship's shields and simply stopped. For a moment, the command chamber was silent, everyone staring at the display, watching the shield readouts flicker slightly from the impact but hold steady, absorbing damage that should have, by every piece of data humanity had gathered over more than a decade of war, torn through a ship's defenses entirely. "Shields holding at 38%, Arya reported, a note of something that almost sounded like satisfaction in its calm voice. "Even at reduced capacity, my shield technology exceeds current Vorath weapon output by a significant margin." Priya Nair, monitoring the ship's systems from the engineering station, let out a short, disbelieving laugh. "Colonel, that shot would have torn straight through a Savanti heavy cruiser's shields, and those are supposed to be some of the best in the Alliance." This ship just shrugged it off. Reyes allowed himself a small, grim smile, though he did not take his eyes off the tactical display. "Then let's give them something to worry about in return. Arya, the moment those weapons are ready, I want a full response." The 90 seconds passed slowly, each one filled with more incoming Vorath fire, each shot absorbed by the Dawnbreaker's ancient shields, weakening them gradually, but far more slowly than anyone aboard had dared to hope. Dr. Osei, seated at the communications station, kept a steady stream of updates flowing to the rest of the human defense fleet, coordinating movements so that human ships could take advantage of the sudden, unexpected shift in the battle's momentum, drawing Vorath attention and fire away from the more vulnerable human vessels wherever possible. When the 90 seconds finally passed, Arya's voice rang out through the command chamber, with quiet certainty. "Forward energy cannons charged and ready, Colonel. Awaiting your order." Colonel Reyes looked at the tactical display, at the 3 Vorath cruisers now fully committed to their attack run, confident in what had, until this moment, always been an overwhelming advantage in every engagement against human forces. He thought of every colony lost over the past 11 years, every soldier who had died fighting an enemy that seemed impossible to truly hurt, every report of retreat and loss that had worn down humanity's spirit fight after fight after fight. "Fire," he said. The Dawnbreaker's forward energy cannons unleashed a torrent of concentrated power unlike anything the Vorath fleet had ever encountered from human forces. Twin beams of brilliant white energy tore across the distance between the ships in an instant, striking the lead Vorath cruiser directly along its forward hull. The effect was immediate and devastating. The beams punched through the cruiser's shields as if they were not there at all, tearing deep into the ship's armored hull. and within seconds, a massive secondary explosion tore through the vessel's midsection, likely triggered by a hit to critical power systems buried beneath the outer armor. The lead Vorath cruiser, a ship that had survived years of combat against desperate human resistance, broke apart in a silent, brilliant flash of light and debris. For a moment, both sides of the battle seemed to hold their breath. Then chaos erupted. The two remaining Vorath cruisers, shaken by the sudden and total loss of their lead ship, broke formation, moving to flank the Dawnbreaker from two different directions, their weapons firing with increased intensity, clearly recognizing now that this unknown human ship represented a far greater threat than their initial assessment had suggested. Their smaller attack craft, previously engaged with human defense fighters, began redirecting toward the massive new threat as well, their commanders apparently deciding that destroying the Dawnbreaker had become the priority above all else. Incoming fire from multiple vectors, Arya reported, its calm voice a steady anchor amid the sudden intensity of the battle. Shield strength, dropping more rapidly now, currently at 22%. I recommend evasive maneuvers while weapons recharge. Reyes gripped the arms of the command chair, feeling the ship shudder slightly, as Arya began executing evasive patterns. Patterns based on 11,000-year-old combat data suddenly brought back into practical use. Nair, talk to me. How long until we can fire again? Arya's diverting everything she can into the weapons, Priya called out from the engineering station, sweat visible on her forehead despite the cool temperature of the ship's interior. Maybe another 2 minutes, but that's assuming we don't take a critical hit before then. 2 minutes. In the middle of an active battle against two remaining heavy cruisers and a swarm of smaller attack craft, 2 minutes felt impossibly long. It was Dr. Ose who spotted an opportunity that changed the course of the battle. Watching the tactical display carefully, tracking the movement patterns of the human defense fleet still fighting nearby, she realized that several human light cruisers, though badly outmatched against Vorath heavy ships on their own, were positioned in a way that, combined with the Dawnbreaker's unique capabilities, might create a genuine tactical advantage. Colonel, she said quickly, if we can draw the two remaining cruisers into a pincer position between us and the human fleet, even a partial volley from our surviving ships, combined with whatever we can manage, might be enough to overwhelm their shields, especially now that they're rattled from losing their lead vessel. Reyes considered the idea for only a moment before nodding. Arya, coordinate with the human fleet commanders directly. Let's set the trap. What followed was a tense, dangerous dance across the battlefield of Mars orbit, the massive Dawnbreaker maneuvering with surprising agility for a ship of its size, drawing the attention and fire of the two remaining Vorath cruisers, while human light cruisers and fighters, coordinated closely through Dr. Ose's rapid communication with Fleet Command, began positioning themselves for a coordinated strike. The Dawnbreaker's shields continued to weaken under sustained fire, dropping steadily from 22% to 15%, then to 10%, each passing moment bringing the ancient ship closer to real danger. But it held together, longer than anyone aboard had truly dared to hope, buying just enough time for the trap to close. When the moment finally came, it came all at once. The Dawnbreaker's forward cannons, fully recharged, fired again, this time targeting the second Vorath cruiser directly, striking its already weakened shields, worn down from the ship's aggressive pursuit of the human vessel. At the exact same moment, coordinated perfectly through Arya's rapid communication with Human Fleet Command, a full volley of fire from 6 human light cruisers struck the same target from a different angle, catching the Vorath ship in a crossfire it had no time to properly defend against. The second Vorath cruiser suffered catastrophic damage, its shields collapsing entirely under the combined assault, its hull breached in multiple locations. It did not explode as violently as the first, but it went dark, drifting powerless, clearly no longer capable of continuing the fight. The third and final Vorath cruiser, watching 2 of its companion vessels destroyed or disabled in the span of only a few minutes, made the decision that Vorath commanders rarely made in the 11 years of this war. It retreated, along with its remaining smaller attack craft, breaking away from the battle and jumping into faster-than-light travel, abandoning the fight entirely, rather than face whatever this ancient human ship might do next. Silence fell over the command chamber of the Dawnbreaker, broken only by the quiet hum of the ship's systems and the sound of exhausted, disbelieving breathing from everyone aboard. They're retreating. Dr. Osei said quietly, staring at the tactical display as if she could not quite believe what she was seeing. The Vorath are retreating. Colonel Reyes leaned back in the command chair, feeling the tension of the last several minutes finally begin to drain from his body, replaced by a kind of exhausted, disbelieving relief. In 11 years of war, he had never once seen a Vorath force retreat from a battle. Not once. They fought until victory, or until every ship in their formation was destroyed. Retreat simply was not part of how they waged war. Until today. Arya, he said quietly. Damage report. Shields at 8%, requiring extensive recharge and minor repair. Arya replied. Weapon systems intact, but requiring recharge before another engagement. Hull integrity at 96%, with only minor damage sustained during evasive maneuvers. Overall, I would describe this outcome as considerably better than my initial estimate suggested. Priya Nair let out a shaky laugh from the engineering station, running a hand through her hair. Considerably better is one way to put it. Colonel, we just took on 3 Vorath heavy cruisers with a ship that's barely half repaired, and we won. Reyes allowed himself a small, tired smile, though his mind was already moving forward, thinking about what this battle meant beyond the immediate relief of survival. We didn't just win, Nair. We made them run. Do you understand what that means? Every human soldier out there fighting this war has spent 11 years believing the Vorath don't retreat, that they can't be stopped, only slowed down. Today, we proved that wrong. Elena Cruz, who had spent the entire battle standing quietly near the back of the command chamber, watching the tactical display with her heart pounding, finally found her voice. What happens now? It was a question that, in the hours and days that followed, would be asked across every corner of human space, and eventually, across the wider galaxy as well. News of the battle above Mars spread with incredible speed, carried by every communication channel available, human and alien alike. A single, ancient warship, buried and forgotten for 11,000 years, had engaged and defeated a Vorath strike force that outnumbered it, forcing an enemy that had never before retreated in this entire war to break off and flee. For humanity, exhausted after over a decade of losses, the news landed like a spark on dry grass. Colonists across dozens of worlds who had spent years bracing for eventual defeat suddenly found themselves talking about the Dawnbreaker in tones of genuine hope, sharing images and reports of the battle, imagining what it might mean if humanity's ancient technology could be fully restored and, perhaps, even replicated for an entire fleet. For humanity's allies, the Koran and the Savanti and the smaller nations still fighting alongside them, the news brought a mixture of relief and renewed interest, a sense that perhaps this desperate war was not as unwinnable as it had begun to feel. For the Vorath, though no human would know their exact reaction for some time, the battle above Mars marked something else entirely, the first crack in the belief that had driven their conquest across the galaxy for so many years, the belief that no species they encountered could ever truly stand against them. Colonel Reyes, sitting in the command chair of a ship that had just changed the course of galactic history, did not think about any of that in the immediate aftermath of the battle. He thought only of the exhausted, disbelieving relief on the faces of his small crew, of the steady, patient voice of Arya, continuing to report system statuses as if nothing extraordinary had happened at all, and of the long road that still lay ahead before this war could truly be won. Arya, he said finally, watching the tactical display clear as the last remnants of the battle faded from the sensors. Get us back down to Mars. We've got a lot of repairs to finish, and I have a feeling we're going to need everything you've got, and soon. Understood, Colonel, Arya replied. And, if I may say so, it is good to finally be of use again, after so very long. Reyes allowed himself one more small smile before turning his attention to the work still ahead. Welcome back, Dawnbreaker. You picked one hell of a way to wake up. In the months that followed the battle above Mars, the galaxy began to change in ways that no one, human or alien, had fully expected. The Dawnbreaker returned to the excavation chamber beneath Hellas Basin, and repair work resumed with a new sense of urgency and purpose. What had once been a slow, careful research project became something closer to a race, as engineers and scientists worked to bring the ancient warship to full operational readiness as quickly as possible. Colonel Reyes pushed his teams hard, but he no longer needed to explain why the work mattered. Everyone involved had seen the footage of the battle, had heard the reports of a Vorath strike force forced into retreat for the first time in over a decade of war. Nobody needed convincing anymore. Dr. Amara Ose continued her work translating Arya's ancient records, slowly piecing together fragments of humanity's lost history. What she found, over the following months, painted a picture of an ancient human civilization, far more advanced and far more tragic than anyone had first imagined. There had been dozens of worlds, she learned, cities and cultures that no longer existed, even as ruins, all lost in the terrible war against the Devourers so long ago. There had been other ships too, Arya confirmed, sister vessels to the Dawnbreaker, hidden away in other locations across old human space, their locations lost to time and the deliberate choices of humanity's ancient survivors. This revelation sparked a new mission, one that would occupy human exploration efforts for years to come, the search for other lost ships from humanity's ancient past. Using fragments of navigational data recovered from Arya's memory banks, degraded but not entirely lost after 11,000 years, small teams of explorers and historians began searching old star systems, some abandoned, some now home to entirely different alien civilizations, who had settled there long after ancient humanity's fall. The search would not always succeed. Some locations, when finally reached, held nothing but empty ruins, ships long since destroyed by time, disaster, or unknown hands. But other searches proved successful. Within a year, a second ancient warship, smaller than the Dawnbreaker but still far more advanced than current human technology, was discovered buried on a distant moon, in a system humanity had only recently gained access to. Within 2 years, 3 more discoveries followed, scattered across old human space, each one adding another piece to the growing picture of humanity's lost history, and each one adding, slowly but surely, to the strength of humanity's current military. Elena Cruz found herself, somewhat to her own surprise, becoming a key figure in these search efforts. Her practical knowledge of geology and excavation, combined with her first-hand experience working alongside Arya on the original Dawnbreaker project, made her uniquely valuable to teams searching for other buried ships. She left Mars eventually, traveling to distant systems she had never expected to see, helping to recover pieces of a history that belonged, in some strange way, to every human alive, herself included. Colonel Reyes remained in command of the Dawnbreaker itself, now humanity's flagship in every sense of the word, both militarily and symbolically. As repairs continued, and the ship's systems came closer and closer to full operational capacity, its role in the ongoing war against the Vorath grew steadily larger. The Dawnbreaker became the centerpiece of a new human battle strategy, no longer built around simply surviving Vorath attacks and slowing their advance, but around actively pushing back, retaking lost territory, and forcing the enemy onto the defensive for the first time since the war began. It was not an easy or a quick change. The Vorath, despite their retreat above Mars, remained a powerful and dangerous enemy, with vast fleets and resources that still, in raw numbers, far exceeded anything humanity and its allies could field. Battles were still lost. Soldiers still died. The war did not end simply because one ancient ship had proven itself capable of standing against overwhelming odds. But something fundamental had shifted, both in the practical balance of the war and in the spirit of everyone fighting it. The Vorath, who had spent years advancing with what seemed like unstoppable confidence, now found themselves facing an enemy that had proven, undeniably, that they could be hurt, that they could be forced to retreat, that their long string of unbroken victories was not, in fact, unbreakable. Human morale, worn thin by over a decade of loss and retreat, began to recover in ways that surprised even the most optimistic military analysts. Colonies that had been quietly preparing evacuation plans instead began rebuilding damaged defenses with renewed determination. Recruitment numbers, which had been declining steadily as the war dragged on, began rising again, as young men and women across human space, inspired by stories of the Dawnbreakers stand above Mars, volunteered to join a fight that finally seemed winnable. Even humanity's alliance with the Koran and the Savanti began to shift, in subtle but important ways. Where humans had once been treated as the youngest, weakest member of the alliance, tolerated more than respected, the discovery of the Dawnbreaker, and the ancient civilization behind it, forced a slow reconsideration among the older species. Perhaps humanity was not simply a young, inexperienced nation stumbling through its first contact with a wider galaxy. Perhaps, in some ways that mattered deeply to species who valued long history and ancient achievement above almost everything else. Humanity was older and more accomplished than anyone, including humans themselves, had ever realized. Dr. Osei, invited eventually to present her historical findings before a joint session of the Galactic Alliance Council, a body made up of representatives from every species still fighting alongside humanity against the Vorath, found herself standing before an audience that listened with far more attention and respect than any human diplomat had received in the 200 years since first contact. For 200 years, she told the assembled council, her voice steady despite the weight of the moment. Many of you have seen humanity as new, as untested, as a species still finding its place among older, wiser nations. What we have learned over the past year, through the recovery of the Dawnbreaker and the ships that followed her, is that humanity's story did not begin 200 years ago. It began far longer ago than any of us truly understood, in a war against an enemy as terrible as the one we now face together. Our ancestors won that war, at a cost so great that they chose to forget it rather than carry its weight forward. We are only now beginning to remember, and I believe that memory, that history, that hard-earned strength, is something humanity is proud to bring to this alliance, not as the newest member seeking approval, but as a nation that has faced total annihilation before, and survived. The response to her words spread quickly across the galaxy, carried through news networks and diplomatic channels alike, adding further momentum to the shift already underway in how humanity was viewed by its allies, and, increasingly, by its enemies. The Vorath, for their part, adjusted their strategy in the months following the battle above Mars, no longer treating human forces as a lesser priority to be dealt with easily while focusing their main efforts elsewhere. Reports began coming in of increased Vorath aggression, specifically targeting human systems, an apparent effort to destroy the growing threat before it could develop further. This led to some of the hardest fighting of the entire war, as human forces, now bolstered by the Dawnbreaker and the growing number of recovered ancient ships, found themselves facing renewed and intensified Vorath assaults. It was during one of these intensified campaigns, nearly 2 years after the initial discovery on Mars, that the Dawnbreaker faced its greatest test yet, a full Vorath invasion fleet, dozens of ships strong, moving to retake a border system that human and allied forces had recently liberated. Colonel Reyes, now leading a small but growing task force built around the Dawnbreaker and 2 of the other recovered ancient ships, faced odds that, even with humanity's newfound technological advantage, remained deeply dangerous. The battle that followed lasted nearly 18 hours, one of the longest and most costly engagements of the entire war. Losses were heavy on both sides. 2 of the smaller allied ships supporting the human task force were destroyed. The Dawnbreaker herself sustained serious damage, her shields collapsing entirely at one point during the fighting, forcing Colonel Reyes to make desperate tactical decisions to keep his ship and crew alive while continuing to fight. But in the end, the Vorath invasion fleet was broken, its remaining ships forced into a full retreat, abandoning their attempt to retake the border system. It was, by every measure available, the largest and most significant human victory of the entire war, a battle that historians would study and reference for generations to come. Colonel Reyes, standing in the Dawnbreaker's command chamber after that battle, exhausted and injured but alive, found himself thinking back to the quiet, uncertain day nearly 2 years earlier, when he had first stood before the ship's ancient hull, buried beneath Martian rock, unsure of what he had found or what it might mean. "Arya," he said quietly, as medical teams moved through the ship treating the wounded, and engineers began assessing the damage from the battle. "Did you ever imagine, back when you were first built, that you would end up fighting a war, 11,000 years later, for people who barely remembered you existed?" Arya was quiet for a moment before answering, its voice carrying the same calm, patient tone it always had, though something in it now felt, to Reyes, subtly different than it had 2 years earlier, something that had grown and changed alongside the crew it had come to know so well. "I was built with a simple purpose, Colonel," Arya said, "to protect humanity, whatever form that protection might need to take, whenever it might be needed. I did not know how long I would sleep, or what kind of world I would wake to find. But I have come to understand, over these past 2 years, that the purpose I was built for has not changed, even if everything else has. Humanity needed protecting 11,000 years ago. Humanity needs protecting now. I am grateful, more than I know how to properly express, that I was given the chance to serve that purpose once again. Reyes nodded slowly, looking out through the command chamber's viewport at the stars beyond, stars that had once belonged to an ancient human civilization long since lost to history, now slowly, carefully, becoming humanity's own once again. The war against the Vorath was far from over. There would be more battles, more losses, more long, difficult years of fighting still ahead, before any kind of lasting peace could be found. But something had changed on that day above Mars, 2 years earlier, something that could not be undone. Humanity had rediscovered a part of itself that had been lost for 11,000 years, the knowledge that it had once faced complete destruction, and had not only survived, but endured, rebuilt, and grown strong enough to reach the stars once again. Across human space, in colonies and cities on dozens of worlds, people who had spent over a decade bracing for defeat now looked to the stars with something they had not felt in a very long time: real, genuine hope. Children were named after the Dawnbreaker. Schools taught new lessons about humanity's rediscovered ancient history, lessons that filled classrooms with a sense of pride and wonder that had been missing for years. Soldiers on the front lines carried with them the knowledge that somewhere out there, an ancient ship, older than almost anything else in the galaxy, was fighting alongside them, proof that humanity had endured worse than this before, and had come out the other side. Colonel Marcus Reyes remained in command of the Dawnbreaker for many years to come, leading her through battles that would slowly, steadily turn the tide of the long war against the Vorath. Dr. Amara Osei continued her historical work, eventually publishing a complete account of humanity's ancient civilization that became required reading across every human world. Priya Nair went on to lead the engineering efforts behind an entirely new generation of human warships, built using technology recovered from the Dawnbreaker and her sister ships, technology that would eventually allow humanity to field a fleet worthy of its ancient legacy. Elena Cruz spent years traveling the stars, searching for the remaining pieces of humanity's lost history, and finding, more often than she ever expected, that the universe still had secrets left for those willing to look. And deep within the Dawnbreaker's command chamber, Aria continued its long vigil, watching over the crew it had come to care for, carrying forward a purpose given to it, 11,000 years earlier, by a civilization long since gone, but never truly forgotten. The war would end, eventually, many years later, though that is a story for another time. What mattered, in the years immediately following the discovery beneath Hellas Basin, was simple enough for anyone to understand. Whether human or alien, soldier or historian, humanity had been buried once, forgotten and nearly destroyed, and it had risen again. And when the moment came that the galaxy needed it most, humanity, older and stronger than anyone, including itself, had ever truly known, had risen once more.